So I think from the start, I probably was destined for the steel industry. And then, of course, landing in Newcastle in those days, the BHP Steelworks, biggest employer in town, dominated the local economy. And as I finished high school, found myself with a degree traineeship in commerce at the Steelworks. So the Steelworks had always been part of my life. Our life was in the background. It was the big guy in town in Newcastle, for better or for worse. But that's how I found my way into the steel industry. And as I said, probably destined from birth, being born in Lithgow.
What are some of the earliest lessons or values that you can remember being instilled in you with that family background and being surrounded by those kinds of jobs?
Work, right? Work. Both my mum and dad worked. Dad, coal miner. Mum sold dresses at a dress shop in Belmont for 30 years.
Now, can you tell us more about what you studied, what you applied that work ethic to, and what really brought you into those early days of working in steel?
Living and breathing the rod mill, living and breathing the blast furnace. And of course, in those days, as staff, trainees, we were the strike breakers. So when one of the continuous operating facilities had a strike, and our industrial relations in those days was much poorer than it is now, so that was a very regular occurrence. We'd get the phone call and say, you're working the blast furnace floor on afternoon shift or dog watch, or you're working the coke ovens lids on afternoon shift or dog watch. So you'd finish your day work, put your cotton drills on. If you're working on the lids, put your wooden clogs on and go and work on the coke ovens lids. I know the coke oven lids well because that tended to be where they sent me. I don't know why that was the case, but that tended to be the place that I was sent more than most. But it's just an incredible way, even for someone who was studying accounting, to learn about the operations of the business and the critical issues in the business.
Yeah, it sounds like you were thrust very practically into seeing the
Very
operations.
practically.
Yeah.
Hands-on practically, yes. It's not as inspiring or planned as it sounds, as it might have been, but that's where I ended up. So worked part-time, studied full-time, finished my degree, went into the cost department at BHP in Newcastle, in that fabulous old building that looks like it's gone with the wind. Beautiful old stone and timber building. And I worked there for a couple of years in the cost department. And then BHP decided to build a brand new rod mill in Brisbane. And I applied for and got the job as the accountant at the rod mill in Brisbane, and a brand new facility that was under construction at the time, which was a unique experience in and of itself.
Was leadership something that you really had in mind? Was it an aspiration?
I think I probably always gravitated towards leadership roles at school, in sporting teams. I tended to find myself invariably in some sort of leadership role, and then it's about just stepping in and taking it. So probably not an aspiration or a plan again, but it seems to be the way it's worked out. I started as the general manager at Palmer Tube Mills in my late 20s. So that was my first real step out of my function of finance into a leadership role, and a bit of happenstance, as I said, in the right spot at the right time. So that's how it all started.
That sounds very daunting.
It was frightening. It was terrifying. Sometime after that, Palmer's was sold to another Australian industrial company called Australian National Industries, based out of Sydney. So they acquired the Palmer Tube Mills business. I went into A&I. Sometime after that, the Smorgon Steel Group in Melbourne acquired Australian National Industries as they were listing on the stock exchange, coming out of private ownership and onto the stock exchange. And then I found myself in the Smorgon Steel Group and in Melbourne, so Melbourne finally got me. And then, of course, I had 10 years at Smorgon's until ultimately the Smorgon Steel Group was broken up and sold to BlueScope and One Steel at the time.
That's great. And when you arrived at BlueScope, what was your impression of the place?
Well, BlueScope at that stage was incredibly successful. It had come out of BHP, the share price was flying, massive investments in Asia. And not long after I arrived, 2007, I arrived. In 2008, Paul asked me to go to the US and take on the US businesses, and we ran straight into the GFC. It was a tough time for the organisation.
Did you ever ask yourself at the time, why did I do this?
Well, I remember going home on more than one occasion saying to my wife, Anna, I reckon we're cooked. I think this is over. You probably need to start and think about moving the kids back to Australia because I'm not sure I'm going to be here that long. I didn't have time at the time to be thinking, gosh, I wish I'd have done something different. You just roll your sleeves up and get into it and hope that wherever you land, and assume that wherever you land, there'll be something else to do or another opportunity. Because I left there in 2011, came back to Australia and walked straight into, you know, the very serious situation that we had here in Port Kembla and the really tough decisions to shut number 6, a whole bunch of assets here, the hot strip mill at Western Port. So I think I jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire.
What did you think of Port Kembla at the time? Or what did you observe about this massive industrial asset, this icon?
Well, if I had any advantage, I think this was where I had an advantage because growing up in Newcastle, I had the mirror image of what's happening here in Port Kembla. So I understood the community. I understood, not being from here, but I understood what the community would be like. I understood the influence and the impact that the business has on the community. I understood the role that it plays in the community. I understood how critical it is to the community. And, you know, in some ways, you talked before about aspiring or inspiration. I mean, in some ways, what inspired me or drove me to keep going is I'd seen what happens to a town and a community when a steelworks closes. I saw it in Newcastle. Yeah, it was a pretty confronting period, but you know, great, unbelievable team effort from the very top of the organisation to the workforce who all made sacrifices, all lent into the issue, all took it on very courageously, dealt with it. And when you look at the business now, as you say, number 6, I remember Dave Bell at the time was running the front end. I went out with Dave Bell and sat with him when he told the team at number 6 we were going to close number 6. I mean, one of the most memorable, sadly memorable moments of my working career. And Dave did it unbelievably courageously. And I look at it now.
Would have been insanely difficult.
Yeah.
And the big picture, though, globally, that is a very different kind of role. So how did you shift from being head of the business in Australia to being the head of things globally? Surely that has a different set of concerns or questions.
It's an extraordinary company. There's lots of stories of Australian companies going overseas, not getting it right, coming home with their tail between their legs. We've stayed the course, and I think that's one of the great strengths and one of the great attractions of BlueScope, that you're operating in a company that is truly a global company. I've said flippantly before, and I don't want it to sound arrogant, but you know, sustainability has been a part of the steel industry forever. If you don't come to work tomorrow and think about how do I do it with less energy, with less raw materials, faster, you know, more efficiently, then you don't survive. That's the sort of business that we're in. Because
you mentioned at the very beginning the work ethic, the principles, the values that you got from your family. What are some of the values or lessons that you think you've imprinted on them as they look to you the way that you look at your family?
Well, I mean, I hope that people look and think, well, you know, he didn't give up. He was persistent. And I think they're great attributes to have not only in life, but certainly in the steel industry. I think it's easy to get carried away with how good you might think you are when the cycle's going well. You then find out that it's actually not always about you when the cycle goes against you. I couldn't find myself getting excited going to work if I actually wasn't working for a company that was making something that was tangible and practical and wonderful, as it turns out for us. The importance of this company and this industry, I don't think it's lost on anybody, but I just remind people to to keep that at the forefront. I think, it's such a part of our history and our culture. We're such an important part of the community, whether it's here or in Western Port or Glenbrook or Delta, wherever we are. We're such an important part of the community. And that diversity that we provide for people to be metallurgists or scientists or accountants, but also for people who are good with their hands and they can make things and they're pragmatic and they add value, but they don't necessarily want or need to go to university and get a degree. I think it's just continue to fight the good fight and not lose sight of how important this company is.
Well, thank you so much for giving your time to the podcast today. Thank you for everything that you've done at BlueScope and for acknowledging the many people whose names can't feature in a conversation as short as this one. So thank you so much, Mark, for your time.
Thank you.